How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of the Tier Talk podcast. Unfortunately, Russ cannot be on today's episode. Little conflict in scheduling. We had to do a recording for Thursday instead of a Wednesday, and Russ he has a job now, so Russ has a tougher schedule. But I had to replace Russ today, so I had to get two people to replace Russ. I got Professor Luis Soto, who's a retired major, and Connie Alleyne, who's owner of Civilian Correction Academy. So again, I got two experts in the field, and we have a very interesting topic today. But before we get into our topic, let's meet our guest. Let's go with Soto first. Soto, tell us a little bit about yourself, sir.
How we doing, guys? I'm retired Major Luis Soto. I retired from corrections after a 25-year career where I rose through the ranks. I used all that knowledge that I gained from my experience and got employed by Rutgers University here in New Jersey. I now teach for them. Since 2017, I've been teaching in the criminal justice program, and I'm glad to be here on this podcast and share with you guys.
And we love having you. And to be honest with you, Soto, I was gonna introduce Connie first, but I've yet to be on her podcast, so I went ahead. Oh, no video, Connie. It's no video, so people can't see that face expression you're making. But Connie, can you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hi, Connie Alleyne here. I'm always here. I am the founder and president of the Civilian Corrections Academy. And like Soto, I am also a criminal justice professor at Monroe College in New Rochelle, and I cover the Bronx campus as well. I'm also the podcast host of the The Fly Behind the Wall, and Conversations with Connie. So Anthony's got me a little messed up today, so please forgive me, guys.
Yeah, now, guys, see, Connie, I've told you, be gender equality. I always have to tell you, there's women that listen to the show, Connie. There's women here. We have nurses. We have a bunch of great professions here that follow it, but I'm lost. All right, guys, so check this out. I don't know where I'm going. Hey, guys, so check this out. Before we go into the topic's going to be very interesting. We're going to, as always, kind of have a free dialogue here. We know the topic, but we like to kind of discuss it at the moment to see where it goes, so the show's not scripted. And we're going to be talking about civilians getting involved with custody interaction with inmates. It's a very unique dialogue. I have never even covered this on the Tier Talk venue, but before we go into this discussion real quick, just a little sidebar. I noticed that we have two college professors on, so I'll go with Connie first. What what's going on with COVID and stuff? How does that affect your upcoming semester?
So definitely we've transitioned everything online. That started last trimester because we do trimesters at Monroe. So last trimester, we transitioned everything online. We certainly had to learn a great deal as far as collaborating on Blackboard and being able to post up videos and really support the students. Certainly the impact of COVID has been significant, given that a few students were frontline workers, a few were first responders, and then we had others who were impacted by the loss in general of family members. So certainly it's been a lot to, I think, unpack and still be able to support them and the learning process. So, I really do try my best to make sure that they know that they have support throughout the entire time that they're going through this, and really just trying to give some reassurances, because many of them, given the unemployment rates and such, are really concerned about their ability to be employable once they graduate.
Yeah, it's a whole different time. I mean, I know I was talking to Soto, and I'm sure Soto will explain it here, but he's going through a different type of teaching right now, right? Doing some video teaching.
It's just amazing. We just, transition all to remote teaching remotely. And it's kind of hard because I enjoy going to the classroom. I enjoy the back and forth with the students and the questions. And, you've been in my classroom, so Anthony, so you know how it is to have that interaction. It's very important. But we have to do it this way. This is the way of the world right now. And last semester, mid-semester, during the spring, we went from live teaching to remote teaching, and they gave us a pass on that. Basically, try to get it done as best as you can, help the students out, which we did, and everybody kind of benefited. But now going into the fall, they expect a little bit more. Students have been filling in surveys, as well as professors filling in surveys, what they would rather do, whether to teach live or do it remotely, and then the facilities or universities make a decision. But one of the main decisions that the facility or the institution has done is to make sure that the professors are now stepping it up and saying, yeah, we're going to teach remotely, but we want the students to get the best of the best. So you guys, I mean, I'm working twice as hard, I think, online than I would if I were going to teach live. So it's a challenge. I got to do some videos. My lectures got to go, you know, like video so they can have it in case they can't make the class itself. So I got a lot of work. I got 2 classes to do, not just 1 this semester. So it's going to be interesting.
Well, you know, the one thing that I feel we miss out on when you obviously got to do it over the computer or whatever is the fact that you used to take the students to the facilities. And I think that's where a big impact in what they learned. And now you're not going to be able to do that.
Well, you know, you have to learn. So what I've done is I've contacted the department and their public information officers, both of them, Matthew Schumann and, you know, everybody else. And I asked them is there any ways that they can do what I'm doing? Basically give us like a virtual tour or a virtual, something that they can record maybe that denotes what the department is about. And I can show that to my students. So I'm waiting on their response. I just emailed them today. Hopefully they'll get back to me, but that's one of the ways we can do it. So be careful because that's what I'm going to ask of you. You're one of my guest speakers, so we're going to have to put your lecture in the same fashion.
Well, you know, I love doing videos, but I will say one thing. When I've had the pleasure of obviously teaching at both your schools, I've actually also went to Monroe as well, and you can tell that this, in my experience, the students are very informed because they're being taught by people with experience. And I think that's a big difference when because I've taught at other places where they don't have the experience, and you can tell by the questions that they ask. So when you walk in, it's great to see students like the ones that you have that are just, their questions are very balanced and not so biased, you know, very fair, I thought. But then you go to some other schools where, you know, the questions are actually somewhat sad to say, but could be taken as insulting, you know, especially because I feel that what we do is mostly forgotten anyway. So, but real quick. So again, the topic is civilians getting involved in interactions that custody have with the inmate population. So I thought briefly that we could discuss trust first. Now, we know right off the bat that civilians, they don't come in with automatic trust with custody. We know that. I mean, there's custody has that bond that's in the academy. You know, there's that I have your back, you have mine. There's a level of trust between them that really does motivate custody. But sometimes we don't realize that trust can also push civilians away, because I think civilians automatically come in, see themselves as outsiders. So I want to explore that perspective first. So I'll start with Connie first. Connie, do you agree with what I said? Do you think that most civilians entering corrections do see themselves as outsiders? And if they do, why do you think they have that perception?
So I think there's a way that we see ourselves as outsiders because we don't go to the academy with you all. We don't really have the opportunity to bond in the way that, you know, you guys bond with each other. I think the other thing too is that because you guys are, I think we all working behind the wall, develop a healthy sense of, I don't know, distrust is the word, but you know, we're not necessarily just trusting you straight out the gate. And so I think understanding that when you come in, you are going to have to earn that trust. I mean, but with that requires us cultivating an environment that I think is psychologically safe, right? So when we're already trying to learn the inmate politics, but we're also still trying to figure out how to navigate the relationships with custody, who are the folks that would be helpful, who are the folks that think we're, you know, only there to advocate for the inmates. Like, we're trying to figure a lot of things out. And so I think while we're trying to figure that out, sometimes there is that feeling of, you know, we're not quite welcomed. And I think when you're not feeling welcomed and you do feel like an outsider or you feel like a guest, you kind of tend to conduct yourself that way. So certain matters you just stay out of because, you know, I'm a guest in your home.
Now, I know, Soto, obviously you being from the custody side, do you agree with Connie? Because I do agree with her.
Well, you know, there's several issues, unfortunately, in our field. And when you put it out, you know, hit the nail on the head when you said, you know, there's trust issues sometimes. You know, as us going through an academy, and I'm plug Connie in, right? Not too many people have a civilian academy that can give civilians an idea or basically what it is to expect once you go into this field. And the trust that the officers have amongst each other, and they look towards each other for all types of answers, whether they're right, wrong, or indifferent. They are tight knit. And when you see a civilian, you see like an outsider trying to come into that tight knit family. And you know what happens when you're trying to come, even though that's not the intention, it's perceived that way, that they're trying to get into the family and disrupts what we would normally see as a productive day or a day-to-day operation. And the mindset that we have as officers is that, you know, security trumps everything else. And that's our mindset sometimes, that no matter what they come in to try to do, whether it's a medical or program wise or anything like that, we're like, wait, you don't do that way. We have to do it this way because of security issues, or security is first and trumps everything else. And I can agree in certain instances about that, but other instances we need to work together in order to accomplish the goal. So I'm sure we're going to get more into that as we speak.
Yeah, you know, actually, in my experience, you know, I was custody, but then as I moved up, they got me in charge of civilian staff. So there's definitely sometimes a push, because I think that if we wind up working independently from each other, not realizing that we have the same goals technically, we wind up kind of in survival mode where our department only matters and we're not looking to connect with the other departments. But with that said, I also try my best to eliminate the us versus them mentality. I think that there is definitely a working relationship, because if you really understand the mission is it's collective. You know, we have to work together. But also, I noticed the us versus them mentality could also start from how custody views the inmate population, because if they have like this generalized animosity towards the inmates, they may carry it over to the civilians who they see as inmate advocates. And now what happens here is that animosity that they have with the inmates now make it tougher for civilians and custody to get along, because their perspective of the civilian staff has been kind of, I want to say tainted. But Connie, what's your thoughts? Does that make sense?
So it absolutely makes sense. I mean, I think our reality is that we do need to be in situations where we could start to build that trust. And we need to be in a space where we're kind of all clear on what the agendas are. I think many times civilians don't necessarily know what, you know, the focus is for custody on any given day, right? Like you guys may have your meetings, you know, and usually like civilians, we're kind of just there. We're like the civilian in their house, which is what my training curriculum is, right? But essentially, as we learn, I think it's being involved, really being able to see firsthand how you guys operate, what's important, what the priorities are. I think civilians are better able to get on board and work more collaboratively because they have a broader understanding of the environment. But I think in many instances, because civilians are kind of, you stay over there, we've got this, we don't really know what to do, and we don't know how to necessarily be helpful. Even though we know we may bring a range of skills to the table, how could we help apply those skills to advance whatever the mission is? We don't necessarily know that we're welcomed to do that, because there isn't always this space of inclusion, which I think we probably need to be more intentional about, like bringing a civilian voice to the table just so that they kind of understand what's going on. And maybe there is some value that they're going to add to that discussion, whatever that discussion is. Certainly there's times where it may not be appropriate. So I'm not saying civilians need to be in everything, but what I'm saying is that if you want to have a more inclusive environment where everyone feels like they're part of the team, part of that is inviting us to the table, helping us build those trusting, collaborative relationships. And also that, in essence, gives you guys some insight into what the skill sets are. So what is it exactly that civilians know how to do? Oh, I didn't realize she was so organized. So I didn't realize she was so keen on the security side of things. She's not an officer. Like, I think there's those kind of things that until we start working together, we won't really see where we have some synergies that we're missing out on opportunities.
Well, I saw Soto nodding his head. I know some parts he was in agreement, but what was hitting you good with what Connie was saying?
Well, she's talking about inclusion, right? And that's just, I mean, that's basics 101, right? If you include people in the decision-making process, you're going to get more, they're going to be more apt to work together. And, you know, the inclusion aspect of it sometimes has to be taught to our officers by our first line supervisors sometimes. You know, the officers come in, they have their assignment, they know exactly what they have to do, how many counts they have to do a day, they have to stand mass, they have to do whatever it is that's their normal day, keeps them going, and that's what they have in their mindset. All of a sudden, here comes maybe a clinical person or a medical person. Hey, I need to meet with this guy. Hey, I need to give out medication. Hey, I have to run group. And it kind of puts a kink into their normalcy of, I'm not interested in that. I'm interested in getting my 8 hours in, doing my counts on time, and getting the sergeant off my unit. So sometimes our first line supervisors are the ones that can bridge that gap, saying, no, wait a minute, we have a goal to accomplish, a mission to accomplish, and the mission is incomplete if all we're doing is counting inmates. That's not the whole mission. The mission is to supply services to that individual, right? Whether it be medical, clinical, or professional. All those, I believe that first line supervisor and above are the ones that can work in with the population, the officers, the inmates, and kind of meld it together and say, hey, this is the mission. This is why these things are happening. Inclusion has to be a very, very major part of it.
Right, and I think that's something that we've discussed on shows before, where management does play a key part in trying to get the civilians and custody to understand each other's role, but also to believe in the work. I mean, I think that's key. Like, I need to believe, understand, yes, but believe in what social services has to do, what chaplaincy has to do, what medical has to do, and to realize that part of the mission is us working together. That's why that mission statement matters. I mean, you don't want a mission statement that, you know, is separate. You know, it's not, you know, sometimes they don't realize that sometimes these mission statements, they kind of separate instead of bring together. You know, they may be more focused on rehabilitation, eliminating safety and security. And then you have a side that just feels that, you know, they're not being treated fairly, you know, and again, it looks like we're fighting for limited resources and we wind up competing instead of working together and getting the mission done. But I also feel that we also have a lot of generalized animosity sometimes. Sometimes I have a problem with, you know, hypothetically, let's say Connie, and instead of me, you know, really focusing on Connie, I generalize it out to all of medical, and then the word travels, and next thing you know, it's the medical department. When it's not, it's really Anthony doesn't get along with Connie, but unfortunately now it's a custody versus medical thing, you know, because of course the person that has a problem with Connie will generalize to concern as, you know, it's not really a personal matter with me and Connie. It's just that, you know, what Connie's doing is so disrespectful to custody. You know, what medical's doing is so disrespectful to custody. And they don't realize how that, you know, that generalized animosity really does affect the working relationship that we have to have with each other, but also limits the voice that we could have when we have concerns. I mean, it's amazing. 700,000 correctional employees, and we'd rather stand against each other than with each other. But the part of the dialogue was basically understand that work relationship. And I think one of the things is, me and Connie mentioned this before, and this will kind of lead into the main part of the dialogue here, is that what we're going to discuss really depends on how we view the person next to us. I think that's a big part of it. So I think that, like, when we were talking about civilians getting involved with interactions between custody and inmates, the kind of interactions I'm talking about may be just simple. Well, I mean, one example would be, let's say, simple non-compliance. I'm not talking about something aggressive. I'm not talking about threats or acts of violence. I'm talking about simple, non-aggressive non-compliance. Like, so just me and an inmate not getting along. Let's say I'm giving an inmate a directive. The inmate's not threatening me. They're just telling me, no, I'm not going to do it. No, you got it, Gangi, I'm not doing the job today. And no, this is your job. And then we're having this back and forth. And then a civilian may come and talk to the inmate, and then maybe able to get the inmate to comply. So when me and Connie were talking about that, we were wondering, how would custody feel about that? Like, how would I feel if I'm trying to give this inmate an order, they're not listening, and now I have a civilian staff who just decides to come in. Again, it's a non-aggressive inmate, just not wanting to do what I want to do, but then the staff, gets involved to try to motivate the inmate to do the right thing. Let's say the inmate listens. How would custody take that in? And it wasn't really such an easy perspective, because what me and Connie were looking at was, first is, this is just what we had in our dialogue, by the way. So what's the intent of the individual who's getting involved? That's one thing. What's my goal in the end? Because my goal is perception of authority. And do I look at that civilian getting involved as me losing that sense of authority? That's another thing. And well, let's actually, why not? Let's kind of bring some. So I'll go with Soto first. Let's say, Soto, you're running a housing unit, and inmates, let's do a simple directive. Inmate wants to come out and clean. Now, non-aggressive reply, just the inmate's being non-compliant and just says, no, I'm not coming out. And you're kind of having the back and forth. The inmate's just not coming out, but there's no threats. There's nothing aggressive. Just inmate's not listening. And all of a sudden, the civilian decides to step in. Doesn't go to you first to say, hey, do you mind if I help? They just go ahead and talk to the inmate, and then the inmate winds up, let's say, complying. Are you thankful to the civilian, or are you kind of upset that the civilian got involved?
Thankful kind of never happens, right? Unless there is a team approach, it'll never happen. No one's going to be happy that a civilian came and basically did what you're supposed to do as a correctional officer. It's just, unfortunately, that's the way we work. And that's a simple scenario where someone is just being asked to go out and do their job. Maybe they're tier sanitation and they're supposed to come out and clean, and they're telling you in not so nice expletives to go pound salt. I'm not doing it. And then somebody comes in, a civilian, says, and that they may be well intended, they may be a person that has a better understanding of the inmate, or they had some sort of, I don't want to say the word relationship, but better rapport with the inmate, and maybe understands that something else was happening, that individual didn't want to do the work that you're asking them to do. But the person itself, the officer themselves, me personally, I'm going to say, wait a minute, this is in your place. This is in your role. As opposed to another instance where we can say is something totally different, where an inmate may be not mentally stable at the time, and we revert back to what officers tend to deal with. Okay, he's being non-compliant. By law, use of force, I can escalate my level of force because constructive authority isn't working. So now I can go to physical force to try to get this inmate to comply. But you can have a medical personnel say, wait a minute, the person's not in their right state of mind. And my expertise, as far as maybe a psychiatrist, psychologist, or something like that, I can calm the person down and not have to revert to use of force. So now you have another issue coming up.
Actually, you actually touched on where me and Connie went, because we were actually talking about officers that are working in mental health units, which they're a little bit more tolerant, actually, to, some sort of non-aggressive non-compliance, where they may have a working relationship already established with, let's say, mental health. So, again, with that established relationship, we kind of know what the intent is. So if the officer's having an issue, mental health is kind of like that partner to the officer, which says, hey, I'll take this, because most of the times probably the officers know if I write this inmate up, it's going to get thrown away anyway. So help me out, see what you can do. But again, we're talking about non-compliant, less aggressive actions. But Connie, what's your thoughts on what Soto was saying? Because I saw a little smile on your face.
No, so the one thing I was thinking while he was talking was that even if the civilian has some sort of insight that might be missing, I couldn't imagine myself supporting that civilian interjecting without having talked to custody first. Like, I don't see you walking past everyone who's already involved in the incident without stopping and say, hey, such and such was going on today. Maybe I can get them to comply, right? Because you want to get the support of custody before you just jump in. I just don't think, so first of all, it's not within the scope of our roles to do that. And so I would be hard pressed if this was escalated to some sort of disciplinary to be able to support that civilian that stepped out of the scope of their role and got involved in an incident, right? But I think the other side to that is if you do have a rapport with custody, they may understand better your intention and know that, yes, I understand that, you know, this provider or whomever, just say in the mental health situation, they have a rapport with this offender, and we're going to make sure that this doesn't escalate. I think, you know, civilians do come in with these soft skills, and maybe that's something that we could capitalize on, but I think there's a way to be strategic about it and not in any way use that skill to undermine what custody is doing.
Right, so we're looking at the invite in, because I can actually picture, let's say I'm actually having this interaction with this inmate. Again, I want to non-aggressive, just non-compliant, but non-aggressive. I could actually see most civilians trying to lean away from it. I think they're going to understand that, okay, the inmates just in generally being non-compliant, and they automatically know when an inmate's non-compliant, that's a custody job. That's a custody role. So unless invited in, or maybe I'll ask the officer if I can help, maybe if I have that rapport and I know how that officer is going to take my intent. Because again, like if I'm working, let's say I'm working with you, Connie, you know, let's have a more favorable scenario now. Because last time you know, me and you weren't getting along, but let's say this time we are getting along. Let's say we learned how to work together, right? So you know me enough. So it's not about your role. It's about the fact, you know, I know Gangi, let me help Gangi. I see Gangi's having a problem. So it's funny because it's not the fact that you're a civilian and I'm custody. It's more like, that's Anthony. Let me go fucking help Anthony out because Anthony's having a hard time. And, you know, and Anthony's like, hey, Connie, thanks you, man, because, you know, this guy's being a pain. But, you know, I can see that. But again, that's because there's a history. We developed something. But the key here is I know your attempt, because my concern is that custody may take that as a challenge to their authority in which they have to preserve. And I think Soto was definitely touching on that 100%, where, you know, the civilian comes in, gives the inmate the directive, the inmate does it, but that still leaves the officer with the fact that the inmate did not listen to them, and that the officer may take as a challenge. I mean, what's your thoughts on that, Soto?
Well, I mean, that's just the ticket that, you know, your authority gets questioned or, you know, belittled in that manner. I mean, I've seen scenarios where we're talking about teachers, right? You have an inmate that goes into a classroom, you know, and they go for their education, and maybe the class is only but so long, and you have these mass movements of, oh yeah, we have to get all the inmates back before count so they can be counted, and then they can eat their lunch, something like that. But sometimes I've seen this happen many, many times, a scenario where they're in the classroom, the resident gets up or the inmate gets up to talk to the teacher or professor after the class is over, whatever the case may be. The officer's like, hey, we need you to get going, the mass movement is going on. And then the teacher is just basically placating or talking to the inmate, giving the inmate that, you know, it's okay to stay and talk to me, don't listen to the officer, while the officer is trying to perform their duties. And, you know, that's what causes sometimes animosity, saying, hey, listen, you're stepping past your role here. I don't mess with you when you're sitting there and doing your education, right? Not interrupting you, not going in there and making noise in your classroom. But when it's time for me to perform my part or my function of the job, which is get them back to where they need to go because we're on a schedule, you know, when you assert their authority, it creates animosity.
Well, I mean, remember, we're told that that's what we have to protect. I actually did a video on the perception of authority, and I think sometimes there could be a chance where civilians may not understand how important that is. But again, if you do know the individual, it's about the intent. So I know Connie at that moment's not coming in an effort to question my authority. She's actually coming to help me. So if I see her as coming to help me, I may be okay with that, as long as it's not a situation, as I said, aggressive, because there's going to be a lot different than me outright being disrespected. That's why I want to add that to the mix too. But before we go into that next topic, I thought I saw Connie writing notes. Connie, was there something you want to add to what Soto was saying?
Yeah, so I think as we had previously talked about, I wanted to just bring up, so maybe this is an opportunity to educate civilians, right? Because sometimes I can see them getting involved if we're trying to achieve the mission. or I could see them sort of thinking, is this an ego thing? Is it like, because you talked about preserving that authority, whereas like we don't know of that. We don't see that. And so maybe I think expanding on like, what does it mean to be preserving the authority, and that it's not just some officer's ego, right? Like, because if the mission is we want this inmate to comply, and the civilian happened to achieve that, we don't care that he's going to get a write-up or she's going to get a write-up. That's going to happen anyway. What we're thinking is we could prevent a situation escalating. Now, that may not be in our role, so I would question, you know, the civilian getting involved to begin with, but I could see someone thinking, I'm trying to help. And now, like, you know, custody's upset with me, even though we gained compliance. Is it because, you know, I've bruised someone's ego, or is it because, you know, there is that, have we now shifted back that perception of authority? Because even if amongst the staff, we know that there is no shift in authority, can the inmate see that as an opportunity, like, or as a weakness or a vulnerability?
I think it's actually could be a game also played by an inmate too, because think about it, that. To me, again, I could be taking it to an extreme. It's very divisive. Like if I let's say, just think about it, let's just keep it within the same department. Let's say I'm an officer and I give an inmate a directive. Let's say mess hall, sit down. They're not listening to me. And all of a sudden a sergeant comes by and they listen to the sergeant. And the sergeant goes, okay, good, I took care of it. I may still say as an officer, I want him written up because he didn't listen to me. No, we're good. He listened to me. No, he didn't listen to me. So, you know, I when we were discussing this in the vehicle, Connie, when we were discussing the perception of authority, right? I think it's great that we actually mention that here, because I have a feeling, like you mentioned, that a lot of people may not realize how important that is to us, but not just, I don't think it's not just between departments either. That would, because I would actually think, again, for that officer that may have that problem, that could even be an issue if another officer got involved. You know, here I am dealing with this inmate. And especially, I want to add something to this, though. I'll add a level, too, because I want to make it more aggressive, actually. So let's say I'm having an issue with an inmate, and they're aggressive in their response. Not threatening, but maybe aggressively rude or disrespectful, something that Soto was kind of leaning on at the beginning. I don't want to help at that point, be honest with you. I'm going to handle it now because I think at that point here, that really is a challenge. If I'm giving you an order, you're pretty much telling me specifically, you know, excuse my language here, but we're all adults. Fuck you, blah, blah, blah. But you're directing it at me, not that I'm not doing the order, but you're directing stuff at me like, fuck you. And all of a sudden this other officer comes in and says, don't worry, Gangi, I'll get that inmate to go ahead and clean. I'm like, no, guys, that's done. We're done here. We're not even at that now. I'm at the point now where this inmate's definitely getting charged. But now, even if that inmate was to listen to that officer, that's not the resolution I want anymore. I don't want that resolution. Hey, Soto, what's your thoughts on that? Like, especially when it's more aggressive in return from the inmate, and now you really do feel that perception of authority is being challenged.
Well, I don't really agree with, you know, somebody's ego being hurt, because we're talking as adults here, right? We know that people sometimes do feel like someone's stepping on their toes, somebody's stepping on my ego. That's not what I'm trying to bring in, because that, we know that conversation is a different conversation. That conversation is somebody being immature, somebody not comprehending, hey, this is our mission, we're working together. So I don't even touch on that. What I'm touching on is exactly what you're talking about. Wait a minute. Does the civilian have a right to be there at that point? When you escalate to that level where now no longer is there, oh, we have to calm this person down, whether male or female inmate, doesn't matter. No, they've gone past the point now. Now we're talking about you are actually being agitated, nearly threatening, and it may escalate. Well, I don't want the civilian there. You know why? Because now instead of just worrying about the inmate, now I got to worry about the inmate and the civilian. God forbid the inmate turns on the civilian. Now I gotta defend you too. I need to deal with the situation. So, you know, when we're talking, and I want the audience to know, if you're listening, you know, we're not talking about that guy that we know, or a girl or officer that's not being mature enough to understand the situation. We're talking about adults, people that are doing their job professionally. An inmate gets out of line by whatever it means. We know that we don't want to escalate. Our main function is to de-escalate. But for a civilian to interject once it gets to that level, I think it's totally wrong.
Hey, and it's good we did this because, and I definitely want to get Connie's response next, is because I'm glad I did present that perspective so you were able to kind of correct me on that, and I'll tell you why. I know that you, first off, you know me. You know how I react to the situation. I'm very good with the civilians I work with. I'm very, whoever wants to help, I know their intent. But having said that, I also know that there's going to be an audience here that would not be open to any attempt. And I didn't have an answer for that at all. Me and Connie were having that discussion, and I just couldn't figure out what was the best way to express it because I wanted to be objective. But I was telling Connie the conflict I have is that I want to make sure I try to present both sides. So obviously I know who I am, but I wanted to try to take the perspective of someone that may find that as an insult. But you're right. Technically, it's very juvenile for them to feel that way. But with that said, there's also a time for it, like you said. When it got to that next level, now there is a little bit of a back and forth that media may have to have. And yes, there's also that safety and security concern. So now the civilian coming in could put the civilian at risk. And I thought that was a great way to kind of paint what the dialogue was, because Connie was giving me what I needed, because I just, for some reason, I couldn't get my thought out, but Connie was kind of saying exactly what you were saying, and I think that was very, very informative. Connie, what's your thoughts on what Soto was just saying?
I agree 100%. I mean, like I said early on, I couldn't find myself in support of a civilian who is interjecting in the midst of an incident or an event happening. Certainly, I understand that at that point, they become part of the incident. They could become someone that has to be protected now, and that's the last thing I think any civilian wants to do. Where I'm coming from is just that civilians, if in fact they can add value to the equation and that they could do something to be helpful, I think by all means, we should be able to work collaboratively enough in order to do that. We should have a good enough rapport to be able to do that. I'm more concerned about that civilian who wants to just jump in just because, there's no reason for that. And I just think when we start to talk about these things, that it's very good that we start to unblur some of the lines, because we understand that some things, there is some ambiguity in, and, when people are working off of their own judgment, that was the judgment call they made with the information they had at the time. We may not agree with that judgment call, but I think it's good that we have the dialogue.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? Even when me and Connie were having the dialogue, I knew there wasn't something right about my perspective. As I told Connie, I said, I know you're right, Connie. I just cannot justify why I have a conflict with it. But the problem is that when I was given my answer, I just said, you know what? But there's the other side. I can't seem to argue against it. So when you came in and presented that, now I'm better. Now I feel at ease. But Connie, when we were having the dialogue in the car, wasn't I saying? I was like, Connie, you're right. But I couldn't lean away from the fact that there will be those officers who are going to challenge that. Now, I also want to add one other thing. This is where there's a bit of a, I think this comes with what we want to do as humans and what the department expects us to do. So let's talk about civilians getting involved when it comes to protecting a custody staff member. So let's say you have a custody staff member getting assaulted in an educational area, and you have a civilian that's there that, is immediately accessible to that custody staff member. I'll go with you, Soto, first. Would you expect that civilian to get involved?
Well, if you're, the human aspect of it is, of course, somebody's in trouble, we should always help, right? But unfortunately, there's departmental policy, right? That civilian's they're not required to assist. I mean, they're taught basically to, hey, if there's an issue, you need to go somewhere where you're safe. You need to follow instructions from the officers. They're going to get you to be safe. So again, I go back to saying, I don't want to have to save or help two people. I want to deal with the inmate. So yes, I'm the officer. I'm the one that's been trained. I know the risk that they are. And if there's another officer in the room, obviously they're expected to jump in and help. The civilian, you're supposed to go for safety. Now, the best thing the civilian can do is to go out and get help, get more officers, sound the alarm, sound the code, whatever it is at that facility, because now you got help coming in. Because, you know, how about if the inmate gets the better of both of us? Now we're both in a particular area and no one knows that we're getting our ass beat, you know, pardon the French. But I also wanted to add another thing. There are ways where like, we had some laws that were passed where CF versus Terhune and inmates with special needs, the law requires us to invite the civilians, such as a psych or to come in. An inmate may be going off the deep end. And before we revert to our use of force tactics and how to take care of the situation, law has asked us, no, bring the civilian in a safe environment as best you can to try to talk to this principal, that the inmate that may be in some weird, not lucid mental state, to see if they can talk them down. It helps on both ends. It helps the inmate, right? Try to calm them down, try to get them to a level where we can deal with them. And it also helps the correctional staff where we don't have to use force, where we don't have to get people in harm's way. So I just wanted to add that as a caveat as well.
Yeah, I think this actually may have to be a discussion eventually that we have on our Chair Talk YouTube channel, because as we're doing this right now, I'm learning a lot as we go along, because again, it's something we haven't really touched on before. But when me and Connie were discussing this in the vehicle, because this was the first thing we talked about helping custody. We did mention that I said I would rather, if I was getting assaulted, I would want the civilian to go get help. That's what I would expect the civilian to do. And I did mention, because I think the greater liability would be if the civilian got involved and now you're walking in on something where now you have two people that are now at risk. But Connie, what are your thoughts? Like, so if you train a lot of civilians, so if you were training a class right now, and let's say part of that lecture was, you're a civilian and you're right in a spot where there's a custody staff member getting assaulted by an inmate, what would you teach for the civilians to do?
So for me, it's getting themselves into a safe place where they can actually go get help. They're kind of in the way, because when help arrives and you're in the middle, and then now they've got to kind of maneuver around you, it doesn't make for a swift resolution of the issue. I recall kind of looking at some like security tapes where civilians were in the mix and they were like a distraction. They were in the way of getting things. I mean, eventually they got pushed off out of the way, but I feel like the reality is that something's going down, you need to go get help. It's not a matter of should you go get help. It is, in my mind, a requirement that if you remove yourself from that area, you need to be getting help to make sure that officer gets the support that he or she needs.
Right, and you know what, guys? A lot of this isn't automatic, like Soto said, the human aspect of it all. A lot of it also deals with what Connie said in the vehicle on the way here, where she mentioned a lot of it really deals with the relationship that civilian has with that custody member. Because, again, there's an intent and there's the outcome. The intent being that I know this person's out to help me, and the outcome being that I'm being helped, if that's the case.
But what, Anthony, the problem is that there's protocol, there's procedures for that, and we have to understand that. So even when we're talking about amongst correctional officers, so if you have an officer that's assaulted by an inmate, here comes the help, right? Here comes the response. What's the first thing, if you're the supervisor, that you do to that person that just got assaulted? You basically have to extricate them out of that situation. You have to separate the person that got assaulted by that inmate that you're trying to subdue. He cannot be part of the escort. He cannot be part of the response. You have to take them away. So if the civilians don't know that, hey, somebody just got assaulted, and us amongst ourselves, we're protecting our fellow officer by saying, we don't want you to retaliate. We don't want there to be anything like that would get you in trouble. You get out of the way. Let us handle the situation. By you being out of the picture, it'll help de-escalate the situation. It's the same thing. That civilian has to understand that if it gets to that aspect where, hey, an officer's getting assaulted, you're in the area, do exactly what Connie is saying. Get to a safe place and call for help. That's the best help you can. That's the protocol. I don't care if you're my friend for 5 minutes or 10 years. Your help to me is to go get more help. don't get involved, because the protocol is the protocol. Let's be professionals about it. Let's know what's right, because if not, you're going to have to do a lot of justifications after the fact, right? Well, why didn't you do this? Policy says to do this. Oh, well, you know, I had to do something because it was to preserve life. See, now you're putting something justification. If I went for help, he or she may be dead right now. So you're justifying your actions. But other than that, there's protocol. Something's happening, go get help.
Right. So let me ask them. Obviously, Soto well said. I agree 100%. But let me ask a question that's coming to my mind right now. And I actually, this may be a tough question. But so if there was a civilian that got involved and helped the, let's say, custody staff member, would the department look to give them some form of accommodation, or would that be not a good thing because it's a behavior that you don't want to encourage? Whoever wants to go first. I see everybody so willing now. So who wants to go first? Come on, guy. Come on, Soto. Code 33, Soto. Get involved. Help me.
So, I mean, you want me to answer on the administrative side of it, or you want me to answer on
listen. Hey, Soto, you have a very good, just like Connie, have a very good objective perspective. You know, like me. Like, let's hear what, you know. Yeah, give me something. Give me all ends.
So initially, there's an after action review. That's what we call it, right? In the military, we call it AR, after action review, incident review, whatever you want to call it, after the fact, right? Everything's done, okay? And what do? Unfortunately, in the administrative end of it, we're going to say, okay, were there any injuries to anybody? Once the injuries were taken care of, now what do we have? Did we follow policy? Did we follow protocol? Did we not? And if we didn't, why didn't we? Is there anybody that's really at fault here? And unfortunately, I got to bring it up. Are there repercussions, or are there going to be lawsuits from the inmate if the inmate got hurt now that the civilian got involved and protocol wasn't followed? So no one's going to rush to give someone a commendation until this after action review gets done or incident review gets done, right? And everybody sits down and talks about it. Unfortunately, justification is the only thing that's going to help that person if they got involved and they weren't supposed to. Justify your actions, and maybe that's why, you know, you can end up getting a commendation if you can justify what you did.
Yeah, I actually agree with that. Obviously, justify why you had to respond as the civilian. And again, that justification is key. What's your thoughts on that, Connie? You got to add, you can't run away.
The only thing I could think of is that unless it was a medical incident, and this is a doctor, or a mental health incident, it's a doctor, it's a psychiatrist, it's a nurse, and they were getting involved for the sake of life preservation, it would be very difficult finding the justification for you getting involved when the protocol tells you otherwise. That's all I can really say about that. I think, yes, we think of what was the right thing to do as a human being, and you may get, like, you know, a pat on your back or great job. But I think the true fallout is when we start reviewing and we're doing the after action review, or we're doing any debriefing and we're trying to figure out all the details. God forbid, say the civilian got hurt, right? Now you're out on workers' comp, but you put yourself in that situation, right? It didn't require for you to get involved. So, like, when you start thinking about from an administrative perspective, all the things that could go wrong and where the department may kind of not want to necessarily be supportive, it's because you made a decision that was against policy. And it's very hard for us to say, well, we're just going to take a hit on your poor decision at the time, right? So, you know, I would just say, if you're not supposed to get involved, don't get involved, because it would be very difficult to get a true justification for your involvement at the time.
Right, and I also think that when it comes to management has to make sure that gets known, because sometimes what people perceive on the surface as a good thing isn't. And if you go ahead and continue to acknowledge that as a good thing, it will encourage others to do that. So someone at one point is going to have to step up and say, hey, what you did, this is what could have happened. But if we don't, and I like what Soto had mentioned, and obviously in partnership with definitely what you said, Connie, was if no one steps up, you're encouraging, you know, that behavior to happen again. And that's where it could be an issue. Before we go to close, I have one last question from each of you, and then we can go into closing, just to kind of round out the discussion. But starting with Soto first, name some, name, I don't have a number really, but name things that civilians could do that could earn custody's trust.
You know, one of the things that it doesn't have to be a civilian towards a correction officer, or it's just human nature, right? Showing interest in what I do, right? Asking questions as to, you know, hey, what's your day like? What do you have to put up with all day? Because, you know, me in the programming side or the civilian side, I have X, Y, Z. Having that conversation starts the trust, believe it or not. You know what I mean? Because you're showing interest in something that I'm doing. I'm here to keep a safe place, to, you know, do my job as best as I can. And you're taking interest in that. That starts, I guess, the roots of building that trust. Secondly, you know, I've had this, and I've had great relationships with some of the best people that I've worked with alongside of me, civilian staff. And I'm talking about in the educational aspect, the medical aspect, psychiatrists, psychologists, nurses, everything you can think of on the civilian side, social workers. They make my job a lot easier, because me as a correctional officer, right, inmate comes to me for something that their needs. I'm their first person that they can get to. Maybe they can't put in that medical slip, or they've put in 3 medical slips and no doctor's seen them yet. No nurse has seen them yet. Maybe they put in that they need a special visit to the social service department and nobody's, you know, paid attention. So they're going to come to me first. And I'm going to be like, listen, I can't help you, but I know somebody in social services that may take this call from me and, you know, hopefully help you. So having the conversation first is the best thing and the first way to gain that trust, because you're showing interest in what I'm doing. And that in turn will probably instigate that conversation to go further. And how can we help you do your job as best as you can, whatever that field may be.
And Connie, on the adverse of that, basically, how can custody earn the trust of civilians?
So I think, for one, just the communication. When, you know, something's going on, I think open, transparent communication with civilians so that we actually understand what's happening. I think that really matters. I think the more we communicate, the more we understand your roles, as well as like what the expectations are of you on a particular post. Because I know many civilians are going into units, or if they're doing groups, sometimes if you don't understand what the priorities are for the officer, it can create a rub. I think also too, it matters that, you know, there is an interest, right? Like, just like Soto said, there is an interest in what I'm doing as the civilian. So like, if I'm doing a group, if you are actually interested, what kind of group you doing there? Or what are you talking to them about? I don't think, you know, because sometimes I think sometimes civilians get a little caught up in this whole HIPAA, I can't tell you, and all this. That's too much. I think that there are times where we could just have regular conversations and just be colleagues, right? And we just talk about what our day-to-day work is like. And I think the other thing too is really sometimes just pulling a civilian aside sometimes, just to say, like, if it's something that they may have said or done that could have been offensive or misinterpreted or misconstrued, I think just telling us, because sometimes we just don't know. And so I think not expecting that we know everything that you guys know, because we don't. And so the more that you guys teach us, I think the better it will be for us to be working more collaboratively.
So Connie, that's exactly what I think that sometimes gets in the way, because I don't know what you do in your civilian academy, right? But I know what correctional officers have asked of me when they're like, man, why does that person, that civilian or whatever, why don't they have a tougher skin? They know where we're working at, you know? They know that what kind of field we're on. Why do they get so sensitive about this, or they get upset because I talk to them this way? Don't they understand that I'm around the inmate population, and the way they speak kind of rubs off on you, even though you were trying to be professional? Now you got the nurse trying to come in, but we're doing something else, or we're getting ready to do a search, and we're telling them, no, you got to get off the unit. Is that the nicest way to tell a person or a civilian to get off the unit? No, but now the civilian's mad at you because why? He can't talk to me like that. Is there a class? Is there something that we do that would help us say, hey, listen, we got to have a little tougher skin because of the environment that we work in?
So I don't know, because I think that's one of those conversations, right? So, you know, there's this big push for civilians to have these soft skills, and that doesn't necessarily mean being soft, right? It's being leadership skills, being able to compromise, having like conversations. But I think on the other side, it's also just professionalism. And I feel like here we are really just trying to bolster, I think, the industry, bolster the profession. But we're also saying it's okay to be gruff, right? Because then it kind of also makes the civilian walk away thinking like, oh shit, like, why do you talk to me like that? Like, you know, I think that reinforces that Neanderthal thought process, whereas I don't feel like that's the truth. I feel like the more that I've talked to custody, the more I've seen them as like, you guys are like regular people. You want to go home like everybody else. I mean, I was laughing at Anthony, his wife's making chicken today, right? And it's like, you know, it's like, this is a regular person. I'm sure at work he may have like a different way of dealing with the offenders, but like, I feel that sometimes for the sake of establishing or maintaining a good rapport with each other, we may have to step back from that. My natural instinct is like, yo, get off the unit, right? Like maybe that might be the natural instinct, but that person doesn't know me to know that I'm not giving them attitude. I'm not being unprofessional. We're in the middle of something and that happens to be a disruption, right? Like, I mean, I think I've worked there long enough that I can get the translation, but I think somebody brand new coming on the unit may not be able to get that.
I'll tell you something, guys. I love watching Conversations with Connie starring Luis Soto. That was just a great episode, guys. Let's go back to Tier Talk. No, yeah, that was good, guys. That was good, man. That was good. And the only thing I have to add on that, because you guys covered it all, the only thing I would say is management then also has to reinforce that connection. Don't let any simple divide go unanswered, you know. Also, try in your approach to balance the need of both departments. Like, you know, if you feel that one department has a concern, let's make sure we hear all sides and be equal, because we are unlimited resources. And sometimes you don't realize when you take from one, it becomes competition if it's not easily justified. You know, when we're learning, bring people together. You know, why does custody always have to take classes with custody? Maybe there's some classes like manipulation classes, stuff like that, that we could sit together on. And maybe if it's possible, when we have those classes, does custody have to be in uniform? I don't know. You know, I mean, you know, just maybe it'll be great. Like Connie said, you could see them out of uniform, you know, and again, maybe also promote a class where we show an understanding of, you know, what everybody does. So bring up the different departments, let them talk to, you know, about what they do to the recruits, because it really does start when the recruits come in. You can't wait and try to introduce it later. You know, right now we can get in with the recruits immediately and expect them. I feel sometimes, to be honest with you, now that I'm on this perspective, and if you guys have any comments, maybe we can add one more thing before we close, because just came to mind right now, is I feel that we spend a lot of our time teaching civilians how to adapt to custody's house. And I think sometimes we forget that, you know, civilians also have a role, and that we also have to kind of give them the keys once in a while, and what can we do for them? I know a lot of the times that we feel that, you know, it really is about rehabilitation right now, and there's a shift, and it's, guys, safety and security is always paramount. It is. I know that, you know, some people don't, but trust and believe, safety and security needs to be paramount. But with that said, once in a while, you know, it doesn't hurt to share the house a little bit. And the reason why I'm saying share the house is because that's what's going to help with the partnership. So all this time, you know, when you're teaching civilians about safety and security, maybe that's a good way to get to learn who they are and learn how they understand the information that you're providing them. And then in return, maybe it'd be great for civilians to say, hey guys, since I took your class on, you know, key control and whatnot, this is a class on, you know, programming and, you know, how we try to take program outside of the classroom. You know, basically we teach here, but maybe what custody can do to reinforce what's going on in the classroom. Is that a perfect world? Is that a dream? I don't know, but the way the way corrections is going right now, it's very probable, and I'd rather us move ahead than get left behind. Do you guys have any thoughts towards that, or anything that? Come on, help me out, guys. I just say, Gangi, I agree with you. Okay, Soto, thanks. Don't leave me alone on that one.
No, I agree with you because I've seen it throughout my career. You've seen that little shift, that little change, where that is the venue that is being promoted, where whatever is being done in the clinical aspect, whatever's being done at that aspect is trying to get that from that classroom, from that, job skill that you're trying to learn, that anger management class that you're trying to give them. Make sure that you take that back to the tier where you're now going to deal with that officer, right? It's part of it all, and if the officers are in tune as to, because you can ask an officer right now, hey, these guys leave your unit on a mass movement to go to different areas and do their different programming. Do you know what programming they're taking? And are you aware of what it is that they're doing? Some are in parenting skills, even though they're in prison. Some are taking college courses, even though they're in prison. Some of them are taking anger management and cage your rage, behavior modification courses. All of these things that are happening that sometimes officers are not aware that they're an integral part, because what they're being taught in those programs, they have to practice because that's their home. It's like us going to school. They give us homework. Well, we go home to do our homework. Where did the inmate population go? They go to their tier. They go to their dorm. They go to their cell. And they're always in constant communication with us as the officers. So,
right, and people may not realize that obviously custody is number one. I believe that they do. They're the canvas, but there's an art that's got to be painted on it. And I also want people to realize that the programs, the education, there is a level of security of that. You're giving inmates stuff that they may not want to jeopardize, so they kind of keep themselves in check. But also, the programs are about controlling impulsive behavior, anger management, stuff like that, where some inmates, not all, some may take value in what's being taught, and they may start to practice that on the tier, which is where you want it to be, as opposed to, them going out and not really knowing how to utilize what's being taught. So we're part of the successes and failures of what those programs are trying to provide to the individual. But in the end, I have seen, for those willing to take what's being given, become better. And you would even have officers come up and say, hey, I'm glad that inmate took that program. But it's funny now, because now that I do represent that side, but again, never negating the importance of safety and security. Don't take it that way, because it's not. But we play a role in that, in how those programs roll over into those tiers. What can we do to continue that, to try to understand where the program is at with these individuals, and what you're doing is either helping the program or being adverse to the program. And then again, all you have is what's in the class, but you're not giving the inmate an area to apply it, because you're setting up an environment where it kind of conflicts with what's being taught in the program. So I think that's a great way for custody and those other departments to start communicating, to try to see where we can work together. Because while you're having that communication, guess what the civilian side's learning about? Safety and security. They are, because it's interchange dialogue. So as always, guys, the show is the Chair Talk Podcast. We will be having on Russ again next week. Don't forget, guys, check out Connie's podcast. No, all jokes aside, Connie, know where I got you. Flies Behind the Wall and Conversations with Just Connie. And wait a second. I'm sorry. That didn't sound right. It's not. Is it? Well, you know what? Probably it. Is it Conversations with? Yeah, she agrees. No, it's Conversations with Connie. And as always, guys, stay safe. Don't forget, check out the Tier Talk YouTube channel. And hey, Soto, real quick, you have a construction business. You want to promote it?
Yeah, I'm so busy right now. I probably won't be able to get out there and help you out in your house or anybody else's house right now. I gotta get these classes ready for Rutgers. That's what I got.
Well, if you ever go to Rutgers, you may, if you ever decide to go back to school and go to Rutgers, look up Luis Soto, professor. He teaches one of the best courses on criminal justice that Rutgers has to offer. I know, I've attended it multiple times. As always, guys, the show is Tier Talk. Please stay safe.